Even one down the sideline, and he's got Cass over the top. Big side. Down the sideline. Touchdown. His signature move and his signature performance. Allen, big ball one more time. 58 yards this time.
You're listening to the Bruin Bible. This is your host, Will Decker, bringing you UCLA football content all throughout the year for LA Football Network.
And what is up, and welcome to the Bruin Bible. All is well in the world, man. We have college football coming to us on Saturday. It is beginning to be that type of part of the year, if you will, where we get together, we drop our worries from the work week, and we go and enjoy college football as a collective fan base. I cannot be more excited for this. And I know you are much in the same camp as I am. The man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Madman in the house. Talk to me, brother. How excited are you that the wait is over? College football is here at our fingertips. And for the next, let's say, give or take 4 months, we're going to flip on the TV on Saturdays and enjoy not only college football, but for my opinion, on the outside looking in, a damn good Bruins team as well.
Oh, my goodness. Well, it's Christmas comes in late August, early September. That's how I think about it, and then the real Christmas is the cherry on top. So I just can't be more excited, Will. There's nothing like college football to start your weekend and those Saturdays, those 13, 14 Saturdays in the fall. There's nothing like it. There's an emptiness, I think, in our lives for those 8 months when there is no college football. And so I'm just so excited to have it again. The players, the excitement, the fans, the tailgates, the stadiums, the bands, the uniforms, the fight songs. There's something intoxicating about college football, and there's something intoxicating about this UCLA team. And so can't wait to see this great team, I think, defy expectations in the last year of the conference before a new era begins. So many delicious storylines. Can't wait for this season and the success for this team.
I love it, man. You described emptiness outside of college football like a long-lost ex, and that's how it feels, man. He has arrived back at my door via, every romantic movie where it's pouring rain outside, and all is forgiven. Everything's ready to go for the college football season, so it's a lot to talk about. And Madman, this is the second year we've done this, so I want to make this an annual tradition moving forward with the Bruins. It's one of my favorite episodes to look forward to throughout the year. Over-under predictions for UCLA heading into 2023. We have so much talent, so many players that I think are either being underrated or can really, be record-breaking Bruins at the end of the day. And it's going to be exciting to kind of, lay these arguments out early, see who we like, see who we don't like, and kind of go from there. Madman, I gave you kind of the option of doing this show. How excited are you to do the Over Under podcast for our second year now?
Under 10 out of 10, Will. I'm going to take the over in terms of excitement to do this show. So I can't wait. And I think what's going to be really fun, Will, is, and we probably need to do it for last year too, is sort of go back and see what our predictions were and then see how it sort of shakes out. So I think that'll be a fun experience on the back end of this. But yes, give me the over in terms of excitement. I cannot wait. This is going to be a really fun show.
Well, I had Zach Charbonnet threatening Skip Hicks' touchdown record. That was my big.
I remember that. And frankly, Will, I think there's an asterisk there because if you recall, Chip started Charbonnet really slow on purpose to really have him be the workhorse late. I think if Charbonnet really, if there was an intentionality behind that record, Charbonnet's productivity is there. So your heart and intention was in the right place. It's just sometimes it's circumstantial.
Missed 3 games too. And
exactly.
Had like 14 to 15 touchdowns last
exactly.
year. So it could have been in play for him when all was said and done with a fully healthy season. But man, this is exciting. Are we ready to go through the gauntlet of over-under? Are the listeners ready to go through the gauntlet?
They're not ready. They can't possibly be ready. Get your popcorn out. Get the coffee out. Get a cocktail out. You may need to just stop the recording right now and stretch out, get your favorite sweatpants, your shorts, go on the treadmill. You got to really get ready. I remember it's Thriller. It's like Dennis Rodman back in the day on the Best Damn Sports Show. If you remember when he sort of came on the show completely drunk and he's like, I'm so ready. I'm ready. And like with his bloodshot eyes, that's where I need our audience to be. That level of ready. Dennis Rodman ready,
Man, I had to sift through the public appearances of Dennis Rodman being drunk. I was like, that one, the other one, the one after that, the one prior to the Best Damn Sports Show. So much of Dennis Rodman when it comes down to that. But let's get into it, man. The first one I have for you is an interesting one, to say the least. It deals with the position that's been talked about the most when it comes to college football. And I think we got to start off on a high note. 3,169 yards passing last year for Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 6th most in program history and what he was able to put together. We know about the career touchdowns record. We know what he was able to do in getting UCLA back on the right foot. And I know diehard UCLA fans like you and I will always have a large sense of gratitude to what Dorian brought to the program and making us relevant again. I'm not asking for 3,169 yards passing. I am asking for whoever is the starting quarterback, Madman, 2,800 yards over under for this year's passer, whether it be true freshman Dante Moore or the guy that we believe is his biggest competition, Ethan Garbers, Madman. Give me the loot. Talk to me about it. Over under 2,800 yards passing for UCLA starting quarterback.
Oh, what a great number, Will. And, honestly, if you were what this first exercise has shown is that you could have a tremendous career setting lines in Vegas or working in private equity, because the line that you picked is so spot on in terms of where this could go. I think if you break this number down, 2,800 yards over 12 games. Are we counting the bowl game or just, is that fair game?
We'll throw in the bowl game.
Throw in the bowl game. So let's say, and UCLA absolutely will make a bowl game this year. If you look at 2,800 yards, assuming a 13-game season, you're essentially looking at about 220 yards per game. And so for me, that is sort of the magic number in a Chip Kelly offense. I think he would like it to be anywhere between 220 and 240 passing, and he would want it to be anywhere between 200, 225 rushing. I think that is sort of the ideal Chip Kelly mix of really having it, sort of the perfect blend of what he wants in terms of balance. And so when you sort of factor it in that way for this offense to be effective, I'm going to go over certainly for Garbers, and I'm going to go over for Moore as well, assuming it's one of those two. I'd be very confident with Garbers just because of his familiarity, his fluency with the offense. You and I saw it in spring, Will. We've heard some great things in fall as well. I think if it's Moore, he's going to start him a little bit slower in just adopting to the playbook. But even in those games where you start a little bit slower, you're going to talk about 160, 175. You're not that far off from 220. And then once he kind of gets in his groove against certain teams, that number will go up to 270, 280, and what have you. So I think he'll eventually net out to right at about 220. So regardless of who the quarterback is going to be, for a Chip Kelly offense to be effective, and which this one is loaded, and I think given the skill that this team has both at the running back position to complement the passing game, as well as at the wide receiver position to overcome maybe not the most accurate of throws or maybe catching some balls in traffic. I think the combination of those two things makes me say over 2,800, regardless of whether it is Dante Moore or Ethan Garbers.
And I think you're right. And I will say that this team feels run first to start, but you're always going to have those games where you have to throw away the game plan and develop a passing game. Arizona is that game for me this year where I feel like that is going to be an absolute shootout. You're going to have to put up not only points, but points in a fast manner. Because as you know, Arizona led the country in explosive plays last year, plays of 20-plus yards or more, according to PFF. They're loaded, man. Like Jaden DeLora, T-Mac, Tetero McMillan, Wiley, the tailback, coming back. But they have guys. That's a game where I feel like you can't have that back-breaking 5 to 6 minute drive every drive while running the football, unless if you have a slight lead or something drastically changes on paper. USC, for as much improved as I think they are defensively, I do think they took some steps forward when it came to the personnel that they have there. I'm expecting a full-out offensive shootout in that game. I think it's going to be similar to last year. I think it's going to be similar to the year before where UCLA was putting up numbers in the Coliseum, and we'll be making our return there this year for the final regular season game of UCLA's season. You got different teams too. I think Oregon State, they do have a good defense, but I expect that game to be a little bit more high scoring than people anticipate, given that they're going to have a little bit more offensive firepower there with DJU as their starting quarterback and whoever they have in their arsenal. So I'm going to hammer the over too. I think when you add the bowl game, and it does count towards college stats, it's not like NFL playoff games where it doesn't count towards your regular season rushing, receiving, passing yards. I think we've got to hammer the over. And I just want to show how impressive this is. I'm looking back at what Brett Hundley did as a true freshman for UCLA. 3,700 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions for UCLA. I mean, that is unbelievable. I think it ranks in the top 3 in program history in terms of yards in a season. And he did that in his first year starting for UCLA. So what a special talent Brett Hundley was. We got to give flowers where they're due. Hundley, one of the all-time greats to be a signal caller for UCLA. And, you know, Dante would be lucky to have a career like Brett Hundley. And that's my next transition point, Madman. A lot of chatter, a lot of talk. Who's going to be the first guy going out into the huddle when we play Coastal Carolina at the Rose Bowl? Which, hey, that's another game we could rack up the passing yards, right? I mean, Grayson McCall, this guy has a chance to break some records in college football coming back to Coastal Carolina. That's not going to be an easy game. So we may be throwing it week 1 more than we anticipate to try to keep up with Coastal Carolina. But for Dante Moore, Madman, I settled upon this number. I thought 4.5 games started, and this doesn't include mock-up time. We were just talking about Swamp Kings coming into this podcast and how Chris Leak and Tim Tebow were used accordingly, where they would get to the red zone and Tebow would come in and get the flashy touchdown run or the jump pass that has become iconic within college football. 4.5 starts. Over, under for Dante Moore, Madman.
So this is an interesting one, Will, and I completely agree with your analysis on the prior point. And absolutely, shout out Brett Hundley. You said it so well, Thriller. He was the most celebrated first-year quarterback UCLA has had in terms of production. You know, obviously Rosen was very celebrated in terms of hype and what have you, and also had a great freshman season. But UCLA gave Hundley the keys. Neuheisel, had sort of nurtured this recruit, and then Mora just kind of gave him the keys in a way that no one has been given the keys to in their first year. And, just in terms of everything that he did, it was just a remarkable season. It's the year that put UCLA football back on the map, the year that they went to the Pac-12 title game against Stanford. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll say one last thing about the previous point. Also, Washington State is one of those games with Cam Ward where they're going to need to throw it all over the place. And there's just some games this year in the Pac-12 where you're not going to be able to hold it down and just be able to control the game with the running game. And Will, the last piece of it is, if things go to plan, if things exceed expectations, and you have a 14th game with the Pac-12 championship game, the chances are it may be SC again, and maybe a Washington, and maybe an Oregon, and you're going to need to put some points up on the board. So couldn't agree with you on that earlier point. In terms of the number of starts, Will, it's interesting because to your analogy with Florida, Dante isn't a package quarterback the way Tebow was, and in terms of short yardage situation, goal line, red zone, and you sort of did all of this sort of packaged play. Dante is kind of hey, I'm ready to go day one. There's no gimmicks here. I'm either the starting quarterback or I'm not. And so that makes the variance of this even higher. I think that we are in a situation where it's going to be over 4.5. And here's why I say this. There's a couple of options here. I think it's 2 out of the 3 roads lead to this being over 4.5. The first road is he just wins the job outright from day one. And I think he's going to take it all the way. I don't think if he wins the job day one, I don't foresee a scenario where he loses the job because he's a true freshman and Chip is very consciously going to say, okay, there's going to be growing pains. I want him to work through it over the course of the whole season. So he's going to blast through 4.5 at that point. The second scenario is Garbers wins the job, does fine the first 3 games, and then potentially lays an egg against Utah. And then that causes Chip to make a change. And so if Chip makes a change either the next game after Utah or the game after that, Dante's still going to be above 4.5. The last scenario is obviously if Garber starts and just crushes it all the way through, which certainly as a fan of the program, as a benefactor of the program, as seeing Garbers want to do really well as an individual as well, we're hoping for. But I think that scenario, Will, out of the 3 is the least likely, if I were to be completely honest. So I think for those reasons, I think Moore is going to go over in terms of 4.5, because I also don't see a scenario where we abandon it and early November Moore gets the start. It's going to be one of those things where he's either going to get the start earlier and we're going to see this thing through, or it's sort of a wait until next year. And I just, the way it's looking, it just seems really close right now. Moore just nipping on Garbers' heels. It just feels like Moore's going to be the day one starter.
Yeah. And, just to clarify too, I was not comparing the direct situation of Tebow's game to Dante Moore. It was more of like, that freshman's so good, we can't keep him off.
Yes, absolutely.
So just to kind of reference some of the quarterbacks that we've had that with, your Cade McNamara's, your JJ McCarthy's at Michigan, very split. Very split. One would get the first half, one would get the second half. McCarthy got in there and made some plays, eventually won the job down the line. Let's talk about Caleb Williams at Oklahoma with Spencer Rattler. That became a thing. When he came in, they had to pull Rattler against Texas. And then Caleb Williams is the true freshman hero, comes back and leads them back, wins the game. What about Drew Henson and Tom Brady? I mean, Brady was the upperclassman.
Yep.
They're all going, this, like, the tie goes to the upperclassmen, according to Lloyd Carr, but it didn't really go that way until Drew Henson was kind of lost the locker room a little bit with some of his play. So it's going to be really interesting. You and I both know Chip really values those upperclassmen in terms of what he brings to Pac-12 Media Day each and every year and how much respect he has people for staying and sticking with his program. And I mean, he said the words like, you're going to have to beat out an Ethan Garbers to get this starting job, which is not an easy task. And I think it's going to be really, really close, but I'm going to go the over as well. I think Dante Moore, he was so close without even coming close to mastering the playbook in spring. Right. He was head and shoulders pretty much the only competition I saw that could really challenge Garbers for that starting spot. And even if Garbers does, is the first quarterback out there, that leash is going to be very, very short, because we have the future of the program, the guy we want to give a lot of experience towards before we head to a superior conference. I mean, we know the gauntlet that is next year, the travel schedule. We go to Death Valley, man. We're playing at LSU. We're playing at Michigan. You want to get this kid some snaps and get ready for the environments he's going to deal with on the road before next season. So I'm going to hammer the over. I think,
and Will, the one thing I'll say to your point on that is in the examples that you gave, which were so good and they're so historical, and I remember all of them. I mean, they were so meaningful. In the case of Brady and Henson, they actually Lloyd Carr never really made a decision until sort of the bowl game. I mean, it was kind of crazy. And that Brady's last game, that 35-34 victory against Alabama in the Orange Bowl was his greatest college game. And it was really the only game where he actually sort of had the whole team to himself. In the case of, JJ McCarthy and McNamara, I think that was also a situation where Harbaugh was trying to look for separation. I don't know if Harbaugh at that time had enough belief in either guy at the stage. And so it was kind of I need to see somebody separate. And then I think in the case of OU with, Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler, I think there was sort of an incumbent effect. And then again, even Caleb Williams that year had more than 4.5 starts. And I think where it's a little bit different here is Chip believes in either guy. This isn't one of those situations where he doesn't feel like he has a quarterback. He feels like he's got two quarterbacks, and frankly, he probably thinks he has more than two quarterbacks. So I don't think there's a belief issue. Number two, I think a lot of the coaches that didn't sort of make a decision on quarterbacks outside of Lincoln Riley weren't really offensive guys. When you think about Harbaugh, when you think about Lloyd Carr, passing game isn't the first thing that comes to mind, or offense isn't the first thing that comes to mind. And when you talk about Chip, that's the first thing you think of. And he understands the importance of rhythm and of flow and those types of things. So part one, I think he's got the confidence. Part two, it's a priority for him to make a decision. But then also, Will, part three, I don't think there's enough variation between Moore and Garbers. It's not like one guy's wildly more athletic or one guy's got a significantly greater arm. When you watch them on the field, it's about Moore is slightly more athletic. Garbers has a slightly better arm right now because Moore is kind of growing into his body. But it isn't one of these situations where it's the difference between a Troy Aikman and a Michael Vick, which oftentimes is causing quarterback controversy because the offense looks completely different with either guy. Like when you think about Jalen Hurts and Tua, the Alabama offense looked completely different with Tua on the field because he was just such a more dynamic thrower than Jalen Hurts was. And so I think for those three reasons, I don't really see him sort of playing the musical chairs game. I think he's going to make a decision and stick with it.
I think so, but I think you made a good point with Utah. Like if they were, let's say Utah goes complete to crap. Like you're down 21-0, you get blown out in that game. Offense fails to move the football. If that's Garbers and you have more behind you, waiting to get in, that there's going to be a change made.
I'm saying he's going to make a decision and stick with it in terms of like, it's your game. Like, I'm not going to like swap quarterbacks in between a game. Like, we're not going to do musical chairs in a game. Like a quarterback can lose his job because of lack of performance and then the switch comes. But I don't see this two quarterback system happening at the start of the season. I think he's going to make a decision, stick with it. And then there's going to be some performance element where, okay, I'm sticking with my guy or I'm going to make a change.
I agree with that. I think it's going to come to a fork in the road moment and he's going to commit down the line. So I agree with that point completely. The next one I got for you, we're moving to a different position group. Madman, rushing, in terms of rushing the ball, UCLA had a historic season last year. We led the Pac-12 in rushing for the first time since 1976. To kind of put into perspective how good UCLA's rushing attack was, 237 yards a game on average. It was sixth in the entire nation. And we actually led the country with a 6 yards per carry average last year. So it was very, very impressive what UCLA was able to cook up when it came to the run game. And that leads me to my first point. And the guy I believe is our running back number one, TJ Harden, man. We know anyone that's watched those practices, watched the end of last season, I think Carson Steele is going to be a fine compliment, but he's not TJ Harden. And TJ Harden is going to be RB number one to anyone that's watched, to anyone that's been following. But I do think it's going to be a loaded running back room. So I want to tame his rushing yards a little bit more appropriately. 1,100 yards over and under for our guy TJ Harden.
Will, I think it's going to be over, frankly. I think that it'll be one of those. I think Harden's season is going to be one where he's going to get more than 50% of his yards in the second half of the season. I think it's going to be one of those at the start of the season. You and I have seen it up front. He, to me, is clearly RB1. And in terms of everything that he can do, I think it's going to be a little bit more by committee at the start of the season. One, because let them separate on the field. B, I think because of the level of competition, at least those first 3 weeks of the season, and certainly 2 of those first 3 weeks of the season, it's going to be by committee, and you hope that there's enough separation in the game where you can get a lot of guys different touches. So I think he's going to slow into the game. I think, again, as meaningful as that game is, we sort of go back to that Utah game. On the road, you want to control tempo against a veteran quarterback like Cam Rising. That will be the game where Chip will, I think, really load in and lean in to TJ Harden, and he's going to start getting more and more yards. And then the 100-yard games are starting to pile up. And then again, you look at this situation, Will, 1,100 yards over 13 games, you're talking about at that point 85 to 90 yards a game, and where he's got to average. So assuming he stays healthy and assuming he has a couple big games down the line, which we know he will, especially against some teams that struggle against the run. We talked about the big passing games, but games against Cal, games against Stanford, down the line where there's going to be some challenges, even the likes of an Arizona, even the likes of a Washington State. Those teams have always been historically light in the box. So given that situation, I think it's going to be 1,100 over. TJ Harden will be RB1, and the RB1 will go over 1,100 yards.
And just to clarify what he was able to finish with last season, 23 carries, 200 yards flat, 2 touchdowns in those last games. That, if you round up, is about a 9 yards per carry average.
Yeah.
Like, that is absolutely insane what he was doing for UCLA at the end of last season. And he saved us in that Cal game, should have saved us in that Pitt game as well. Unfortunately, Nick Patty, man, really looked like a Joe Burrow-esque performance.
Patty cake,
Patty
cake. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never get over that, man.
No, Nick Patty looking like Joe Burrow and Cam Newton out there. Absolutely. And I think that's why we're so excited about the start of the season, just so we don't have to think about that game anymore. My goodness. But, Will, just the additional point there is Chip's never had a season, even all the way back to his first season at UCLA, where his lead running back hasn't at least had 1,000 yards. And so if you believe TJ Harden's the lead running back, there's no indication to say he's not going to get to 1,100, which is right close to 1,000, just given his skill set.
And I want to make a point too before we transition. Is I've seen a lot of online talk, and a lot of people chimed in on my opinion, where at the college level, I believe this UCLA defensive line can be the best, that we've ever had as a complete unit. I know a lot of people brought up some pro production and players such as your, Kenny Clarks and your Anthony Barrs, Eddie Vanderdoes. Eddie Vanderdoes got injured in the first game of 2015. So I don't even want to hear that argument. And, I also saw all-time Bruin teams listed out. Maurice Jones-Drew, phenomenal NFL career, all-time Bruin in a lot of ways. Zach Charbonnet had a better career than Maurice Jones Jr. on the ground. Like, Maurice Jones Jr. had 3 seasons, and he only rushed over 1,000 yards once. So, I want to really tame expectations there. Like, he was great. And his only 1,000-yard season was 1,007 yards. So, it wasn't like it was like a 1,500, 1,700-yard rushing season. He was a phenomenal talent. You saw it with the all-purpose stuff. But put some respect on Zach Charbonnet's name. That is Terminator through and through.
Charbonnet, it's a great point, Will. The one thing I'll say is MJD was on better teams and better offenses. And when you look at 05 Drew Olson, Drew Olson's stats in 05,
34 touchdowns.
Exactly. And when you talk about the yards and the touchdowns, and you just talked about that offense, there were a lot of mouths to feed on that team between, the likes of Mercedes Lewis and Junior Taylor and Marcus Everett. And there were a lot of dudes on that team, both at the running back and the wide receiver position. Last year's team, I don't think, had quite the offensive passing firepower that those MJD teams had. So there's a usage rate argument there as well. And I think MJD was also extremely spectacular. And so people remember, the 322 yards and 5 touchdowns against Washington. I mean, that's probably still the greatest individual rushing performance in the history of UCLA. So, there's nuance there. I completely agree with you. I think statistically, of course, Charbonnet did better, but sometimes we have to contextualize those stats. I think they're both phenomenal. I do give the edge to Charbonnet, but I do think it's closer than people realize, because I think there's also kind of this recency bias where it's, hey, just because it happened last year or 2 years ago, we sort of forget what happens 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I understand it. I still think you're right, Thriller, where it's Charbonnet had the better output in terms of stats, but it's important to recognize some of that contextualization.
I think with MJD, if you want to say return man, like punt returner, hands down, like he led the nation in return yards that year. And he was spectacular too. I don't want to take anything away from him, But man, if you get Charbonnet for those 3 games last year, he's 1,500 yards plus.
Yep.
He has one of the greatest rushing seasons we've ever had. So, in terms of context, like that matters that he missed 3
Absolutely.
games.
Absolutely.
Like,
that matters.
That he put up 14 touchdowns and missed 3 games left on the shelf. Like this guy, Zach Charbonnets don't grow on trees. Is my
No,
point
they don't.
on this. So we will be moving to the wide receiver room. And Madman, we went to a bunch of spring practices, and the star player when it came down to what we were able to witness was J. Michael Sturdivant. I mean, there was practices where this guy was scoring 4-5 touchdowns apiece. The hype was there, man. I mean, this is a guy that has an NFL body, really produced in a Cal offense last year that you look at the numbers and you look at the games played, and it's very, very impressive. 65 catches, 7 touchdowns, 755 yards last year when it came to the wide receiver position for Cal, who is, a bottom 3 team within the Pac-12 as a whole. What do you think he can possibly do with a Chip Kelly offense where he's, playing now for a genius when it comes to that side of the football? I want to be respectful when it comes to this because I think this is a run-first team. And I do actually believe, this is my hot take, that Kyle Ford may have more catches because he's more of a possession guy than Sturdivant, who is more of a deep threat, in my opinion. But give me your opinion on this. I went over under 1,000 yards flat for J. Michael Sturdivant in 8.5 touchdowns.
And again, great line. I mean, it's right there with Vegas and private equity. Again, thriller strikes again. It is interesting because I agree with you. I think that this is a run first team that really, again, predicates on balance. It's sort of a 220 is sort of the ideal. 230 is the ideal. So when you break down the average number of yards in a game is 225, 230, to say one guy is going to get 80 or 90 yards, out of that, is one guy is going to get 33% of all the passing yards for the whole season. That feels a little high just given how Chip sort of plays the game. Even when you think about Bobo last year, Bobo only had 200-yard games the whole season last year. And one of those games was Oregon. It was clear garbage time where he got a lot of his yards to go over 100. So he really only had, it was the Washington game was his only 100-yard game where it really sort of mattered. And obviously I think Sturdivant is a greater athlete than Bobo is, but there's some similarities there. I'm going to go under on both. I think Sturdivant will be probably in that 850 to 950 in that range. He's just going to miss. And I think he's going to be right at 7 to 8 touchdowns. And I think that Ford will probably get up 6 to 7 touchdowns and another 700-ish, 750-ish yards. And I think that's kind of where it'll shake out. But I think on any one given night, Sturdivant can go for 100, 150, 2 touchdowns and be absolutely spectacular. So I don't think this isn't really a measure against anything J. Michael Sturdivant can't do, because I truly believe he's the best wide receiver prospect UCLA has had since J.J. Stokes. It's been 30 years. And I think just in terms of size, speed, just the whole package, he has it all. He's going to be an NFL draft pick. He's going to be an early NFL draft pick. He's an absolute stud. I think this is more just a function of what Chip wants to do in terms of balance and to your point, Will, having the run game involved. So I'm going to go with Sturdivant, 850 to 950 and 7 to 8 touchdowns. So he's going to be slightly under on both counts.
I think that's fair. And I'm with you on the touchdowns. I don't think he can get to 9 touchdowns this year, just knowing what the passing attack is, unless if, Dante puts up a Brett Hundley-like year, as we previously discussed. However, I'm going over on the 1,000 yards, and I'll tell you why. We have not had a deep threat like this in some time. So even if he does get those smaller target shares where it's 3 or 4 catches, I'm expecting like 80 to 90 yards out of those. I mean, we saw it. Nobody could guard this guy deep. Like he has take the top off the speed defense. This guy is a track star. His mom, I believe, was a Olympic sprinter. Like this is what we're getting with a guy like J. Michael Sturdivant. So I'm under on the catches if you were comparing it to last year's 65. I'm under on the touchdowns, in my opinion, on 8.5. but there's going to be that play is going to be open, and he's going to be hitting some long plays that are going to lead to either UCLA scores or, maybe upset victories down the line with some big time plays and performances. So get me for the over. I'm locking that in. Slightly under on the touchdowns. That's my J. Michael Sturdivant kind of prediction. Kyle Ford may have more catches and touchdowns than him. If you look at the red zone, threat he can be with that huge body and size that he has, and more of a possession guy. But Sturdivant, 1,000 yards, book it. That's my hot.
And
take.
Will, what's interesting is asking the question about Sturdivant in disguise is actually asking the question about the offensive line. And so it's to your point, because he is such a significant deep threat, obviously the deeper plays take more time to develop. So it's the belief also, and how quickly is this offensive line going to round into form and have the journey that they did similar to last year? And also, how well are the backups going to develop? How well is that depth going to progress? And how injury-free they can be? Because it's so much of Sturdivant's performance is going to be actually even more than who the quarterback is. It's going to be correlated to the offensive line, because if the quarterback doesn't have time to be comfortable, set his feet, the ball's just not going to go further. And so that is going to be the fascinating play there, that if the offensive line exceeds expectations, and we had a whole episode on them, if they kind of hit that growth curve that hopefully they reach and get to that journey that they did last year, it sets up Sturdivant even more for success. And so there's this interesting correlation that'll take place where the better the offensive line is, the better Sturdivant's numbers are. The worse the offensive line is, the better Ford's numbers are. And so that's going to be kind of the interesting interplay moving forward.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun to watch that guy take the top off defenses all season long for your UCLA Bruins. What a gift, man. Next guy up, maybe the preseason defensive player of the year within the Pac-12, Laiatu Latu. 10.5 sacks last year, 12.5 tackles for a loss. And maybe the most impressive thing of all was he basically picked football back up after 2 years of not being able to play or participate whatsoever due to a medical retirement that has since been revised. So I want to read you a quote that was at Ben Bolch's Los Angeles Times piece. He goes, 15, the redshirt senior said Friday at Pac-12 Media Day at Resorts World Las Vegas. I want to get every single quarterback multiple times in terms of his prediction for this season. I'm not going to say over under 15, but I am going to say over under 13. 13 sacks. That's right where Anthony Barr was at 13.5, which is the second greatest statistical sack number behind Ball back in the early 2000s for UCLA. Madman, does he get to 13? Over, under, where do you lie with Laiatu Latu?
So, Will, this is an interesting one. And I think that, again, like the last one, I think there's sort of an interplay here. Latu is going to have a phenomenal season. Latu is an absolute stud, and he is going to get his share of sacks, impact, massive plays, highlights. He's a game changer for this team. He's the most dynamic defensive player on this team, and he's going to thrive as an NFL draft pick moving forward. And he's revived his career in a way that is inspiring both on and off the field. And you and I have sort of talked about this on air as well as off air. His story isn't told enough, to your words, Will. And so any opportunity that we get to shine his story to our viewers, I love to take with open arms, just because of what an inspiring young man he is. I think what's going to be interesting about Latu's season is he came on last year with no expectations, relatively unknown. I think offenses weren't really expecting Latu to be Latu, especially after the previous 2 years of really being out of football. I think that offenses are going to be expecting Latu, and they're going to be shading their blocking schemes more towards Latu. It's going to be, the equivalent here, Will, is a great NBA player. You shade your defense over. The doubles come a little quicker. You're just more aware of that individual. You want them to feel your presence a little bit more. It's a little bit different when now that you have film on the person, right? And so for me, I think given all of that, I think Latu's impact on the defense is going to stay the same or even increase. But I think in terms of direct sacks, I'm actually going to go under because everyone's going to be shading over. Now, having said that, I think who's going to finish second in sacks this year is going to be a higher number than the second in sacks last year, because I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities on the other side of the field for other guys on the weak side to be able to get to that quarterback, because everyone is so focused on Latu and they're going to be shading over. So I think his impact, again, is going to be out. I'm going over on impact, but I'm going under on number of sacks.
And if I was playing devil's advocate, here's where I'd come. I don't know if 13 is a reachable number. I think you have to be the rare of the rare to do that. I'm not saying Latu isn't, but man, that's a tough number. You got to have a lot of luck go your way too to get to those 13 sacks.
It's one a game, Will. It's exactly one a game, you know?
It's crazy. And where I would argue with that is I'm all in on this defensive line, man. It's going to be better. It's going to be the best version Chip's had there. With the last version we saw of Jay Toya was the best version we saw of him, who I believe is going to take his game to the next level this year, become an NFL legitimate prospect. Into November last year, there was an underrated stat that PFF had with PFF pass rush grades and rushing grading against rushers. There were two players with a plus 80 in both of those categories. One was Will Anderson, third pick in the draft. Number two was Grayson Murphy. So, I just want to put that out there. Grayson Murphy, special talent. Gabriel Murphy, they're in year 2 of the system now. They're comfortable at Westwood, which is a scary sight for the rest of the people around. Keanu Williams came in there, was very disruptive in spring practice. Former 4-star talent, Oregon player. Gary Smith coming back in the middle. Oh, Grant Buckey, built like Aiden Hutchinson 2.0 in a lab. Bring him out there as well. He's a true freshman. Decommitted from USC. Get on this kid, guys. If you're putting more effort on shifting the focus towards Latu, which I think a lot of teams will, the rain's going to come in a variety of different ways, and it's going to be pouring out there. So I think teams are going to do that, but the other argument I make is I think our out-of-conference schedule is sneaky underrated, dude. Like, Coastal Carolina won 9 games, and their best players are back from last year. San Diego State is looked upon as the non-Power 5 darling for this year, a team that can legitimately threaten 10 wins. These aren't games where, like last year against South Alabama, or Alabama State, where we pulled our starters after 2 drives. These guys are going to be playing 4 quarters of football, I feel like. So they're going to have ample opportunities to do it. 13 sacks, I am not going over on that, Madman. I will say over 10.5. I think he's going to surpass his number from last year. 11 and 11.5. Do you think that's a fair assessment on Latu?
Yeah, Will. I think he's going to be right there. I think it'll probably be, I think the number for me is 11. I think is going to be right where he's at. And it's so interesting that you mentioned the schedule. And it's a double-edged sword there, right? Because against weaker competition, what happens? Presumably, you're going to jump out ahead really early. And the opposing team's going to pass a lot more because they're behind a lot more. So you're going to get a lot more opportunities in that period of the game, but then you're going to get pulled, midway through the third, right? So you're getting more reps to the quarterback, but it's a shorter game. In a game where, let's say, the competition is greater and the game extends, yes, you play 4 quarters, but because the game is close, because the game is competitive, the run is still very much at your disposal, and being balanced is very much at your disposal. So the opportunities to rush the quarterback are actually fewer in a game like that, but you have the whole game. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes it is a little bit of a catch-22 where I think in the end it'll kind of net out a little bit. And I completely agree with you, Will. He's going to have a phenomenal year. And that's why I said I'm over on the impact, because it's going to open the doors up for the Murphy twins and Keanu and Toya and down the list we go. But I think it's going to be hard to get to that 13 number. And I think it's also going to just be a challenge to up his year last year, just given not just teams sort of shading to him, but the pressure, the expectations. There's a lot to manage this year.
Got you. Well, I like it. I think he's going to surpass his sack total from last year, which is always a good thing to be moving in the right direction. So Latu will be a threat for Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. Keep it on the defensive side of the ball. Darius Muwasau was named a preseason first team All Pac-12 selection at linebacker. We saw it in spring. This guy could not wait to hit anything out there that moved on the football field. He was ready. Chip had to strain him in a couple times. Darius, he would be howling out in the practice field, not to touch his running backs and his prize recruits coming out there. 91 total tackles last year. And this is actually a downturn from him historically, as the 2 previous years he had at Hawaii, he had 100 plus in 2020 and 2021. Does he crack 100 tackles? We're going to go 99.5 right here. And it's tough because of how deep that linebacking room is, where they can rotate out with them, which I would challenge the best on the West Coast among any team, which is how deep that room is. Does he get back to the 100 tackle club and making it a 3rd time in his college career that he's able to do that, man?
Will, this is such a great question because in many ways it relates to the J. Michael Sturdivant question. Remember how we talked about how the offensive line is dependent on Sturdivant's performance? I think that the Mokiao number of tackles is actually dependent on the secondary. Why did Mokiao get fewer than 100 tackles last year? Oh, because one game, Stephen Blaylock had 17 tackles against Oregon. I mean, we had games like that last year where the linebackers were just completely neutralized and sort of sucked into the point of attack. And the secondary was, on islands, and balls were just kind of getting peppered in those big games, notably Oregon, SC, et cetera, down the line. So I think this is going to be a function of how much better the secondary is going to be in terms of containment, but also how much better that defensive line can actually get a push, right? The problem in some of the big games last year was the lack of push by the defensive line forced the linebackers to suck up and really kind of make it a front 7 to try and generate any sort of pressure, which left the middle of the field wide open where you have all the prime tackling locations. And it had to be the safeties and the corners had to pick up that slack in terms of tackling where the linebackers are supposed to be. So to your earlier point, given that you have a pass rush with Latu, with the Murphy twins, Toya's there, Keanu's there, even Carl Jones, is going to come in and rush the passer. You're in a situation now where presumably you're going to get much more of a pass rush with just the front 4, which then leaves the linebackers with more opportunity to be linebackers and really sort of contain the middle of the field. And so as a result of that, I think Mokiao is going to go over 100 and get back to sort of where he was pre-UCLA, because it's more of a product of scheme, of what's in front of him and what's behind him, more so than anything he did. Mokiao was spectacular last year, so it wasn't necessarily that he had a drop-off. He probably was better than he was the previous 2 years because he was against better competition and he balled out. But now the fact that I think containment at the line as well as in the secondary is going to be more disciplined, he can just be a linebacker and have more opportunities to tackle. So I'm going to go over, and I'm going to go significantly over.
Wow. I love the pick. I think, just with what you presented with the secondary kind of sneaking up and taking some of those tackles with Blaylock, Jordan Anderson could tackle too. You know what I mean? So that's going to be kind of a fun nugget to watch in terms of how many tackles he gets per game. But I actually am kind of leaning towards your Latu point, where impact, it's higher. It's a higher, level of play we will see from Mokiao this year, similar to what you said about Latu. I just think this linebacking room's too deep. I just think there's not enough, food in the kitchen for everybody to just eat at 100+ tackle rate, because Oladejo, man, like he looks like the guy that I think is going to flip a switch this year and really become a coveted NFL draft prospect if he reaches his ceiling. John Vaughn's already there. He was named to the preseason Senior Bowl watch, which is the premier bowl game there is. Oh, yeah, Kane Medrano's coming back. He's going to be rotating in there. Carl Jones will be dropping back there every now and then. So it's just, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yep.
And I could see Mokiao maybe even having like a little bit less than tackles he had last year, but those tackles are going to be huge plays that, force third downs into punts and, really make critical stops when necessary, where we'll have to, get the punting return unit out there. But I'm going to go slightly under, man. Do you think that's a crazy statement?
No. I love the argument. I think that obviously there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So I love that point. I mean, particularly Oladejo, right? I mean, he's the stud that can do no wrong. I mean, in terms of just there's probably going to be some moments where they're going to compete for who's going to get the tackle and who can kind of get there first, who's got the longer stride, who's got the stronger, hands and arms and what have you. So I think it's going to be really fun in that regard. I think, so where we differ is I think we're both right. And I think that the situation here is just going to be opportunities. And so the question now will be, will the number of opportunities that the secondary and the front four present outweigh the number of opportunities that maybe his fellow linebackers take away? And so I think it's going to be really a function again of plays and how much this defense is on the field. And I think in particular, it's going to come down to those earlier games that you mentioned, Will, the USCs, the Arizonas, the Washington States, the Oregon States, the Utahs. How quickly can those units get off the field? Where can you kind of steal a 3 and out? Where can you sort of steal a stop in the red zone? I think that's what it'll come down to. I think if he goes over, it'll be, 106, 107. If he's under, to your point, he'll be somewhere in the high 80s. But we're talking about maybe 85 to 105 is sort of where his number is going to be. And I think that variance of 20 is going to come down to opportunities and how much the defense is on the field. So I totally understand the argument. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it could come down to maybe us playing in the Pac-12 championship.
Exactly. You get the magical 14th game right there. Absolutely. All is well with that 14th game, Thriller.
It's very much in play, Bruin fans. We've got to keep our hopes and optimism alive for this season. 2 more big questions for you, and then we are signing off from the second annual Over-Under podcast for UCLA Bruins and the Bruin Bible. 5 Bruins were named to preseason Pac-12 accolades. Darius Muasau and Latu were first team, all defense. And then Carson Steele was second team, all Pac-12 running back with, I believe, it was Duke Clemens and Garrett DiGiorgio being honorable mentions. I believe that was kind of a slap in the face to the rest of the roster. I'm going to actually pivot this, and this is not even honorable mentions. This is just first, second, or third team. 5.5 Bruins. 5.5 Bruins on first and second and third team, all Pac-12 for this year, Matt.
Thriller, I think it's close. Again, you've done it really well yet again. I think if I were to break it down, I think Muasau is a slam dunk. I think Latu is a slam dunk. I think Sturdivant is a slam dunk. I think Harden is a slam dunk. I think those are the 4. Now the question becomes Oladejo, one of the Murphy twins, Toya, 2 of those 3 guys, are they going to be able to make it? I really like Toya's opportunity to make an all Pac-12 team because I think he's just going to complement everything that Latu and the pass rush is doing with that run stopping ability. So I love Toya at 5. And then it comes down to, is it Oladejo? Is it one of the Murphy twins? I think that it'll ultimately be Oladejo will be the 6th, and UCLA will go over at 6 and then have a couple of honorable mentions. But I think it's going to be very special this year that the number of folks that make an all Pac-12 team for UCLA, the defense is going to outnumber the offense. And I think the defense is going to double up the offense, which is something you never say in certainly in the Chip Kelly era of UCLA football, where we've always thought offense first. So I'm going to go 4 on defense, 2 on offense, and that's going to be my 6 and ultimately over.
Yeah, I've got the over as well, man. And you named some good guys. I believe that, your Latus, your Muasaus, Sturdivant, I don't know if it's going to be first team, maybe not even second team, just given how deep this conference is in receiver. I mean, look at Washington, look at USC, look at some of these schools. I do think he gets that third team spot.
Yeah,
he's just not going to have this pure statistical output that some of those other guys will have. But I'm hammering the over, man. I think Duke Clemens is slept on as a center. I actually think if this line can get to a similar level where it was last year, I think there's no doubt in my mind a guy that's had 30-plus starts to his name, a guy that's comfortable in this offense is going to be named to that list. I would also put Spencer Holstege there as well, because I think Holstege, we talked about this in our O-line preview. This guy could be a future NFL player on the offensive line. So Holstege could be there. There's not 2 to 3 running backs better than TJ Harden in the conference,
Correct.
in my opinion, when he's going to be running at full steam ahead. So Buckey Irving's the one name that it really comes to mind from Oregon. I think he may not finish first team, but second or third team, I think Harden's going to be there. And then, man, Like, I actually think one of the Murphy twins is going to make it. I like your Toya pick. I think Toya is going to be second or third team. So I'm talking about like 7, 8 guys right now. If this is the year that we make the Pac-12 championship, the final season of its existence, I think we've got to make it, man. I think it is what it is. And then that leads us to our last question on the Over Under podcast, Madman. UCLA's win total by Vegas. I'm not going to go by Vegas. 8.5, which I think it's a slam dunk over. Like, that would be one of the safest overs that we have. I'm going to raise it up a little bit for you in this situation. No Oregon, no Washington to kind of refresh our fan base. No cakewalk out of conference, despite maybe not some major names there that you may know of as football fans. I'm going to go 9.5. This is the year that we get to 10 wins. I think we're going to have a real shot at getting to 10 wins. What is your opinion when it comes to UCLA at the 9.5 mark?
Yeah, Will, I love the line there in terms of where you've set it at 9.5. Here's how I think about the season. And you and I have sort of talked about this a little bit. If you look at the 12-game regular season, UCLA is going to be favored in 9 of them. And there's going to be nine games where they're favored, 3 games where they're underdogs. The 3 games where they're underdogs, Oregon State, at Oregon State, Utah, at USC. Those are the 3 games that they're underdogs. They're going to be favorites and everything else. The way I see it, UCLA is going to get 1 game that they're an underdog. They always get the 1 game they're not supposed to get. But on the flip side, I see them dropping a game they're supposed to get. And whether that is Arizona, whether that is Washington State, whether that might even be San Diego State, there may be 1 hiccup there. And so when you go net, I think it'll be a 9-3 regular season. And if you go 9-3 on the regular season, you know, obviously if things break and they take care of business and kind of do what they're supposed to, you're talking about 10-2 now, 7-2 in the conference. And depending on the tiebreaker scenarios, you're in the Pac-12 championship game with one of those slots. But I think if I'm just being completely objective, overall, over-under, they're just going to play to who they are. I think it'll be a 9-3, 6-3 in the conference. That will ultimately net them, assuming a Pac-12 team makes the playoff, which there is a possibility thereof. This year will potentially happen. I agree with you, Will. Everyone slots up one. So I think a 9-3, 6-3 ultimately puts you probably in the Alamo Bowl if you're UCLA at that point. And then I think UCLA will prevail against a Big 12 team in the Alamo Bowl, 10-3, 6-3 in the conference, Alamo Bowl champions, and ultimately get to over.
I'm hammering the over. And forgive me if we beat Utah on the road to start this season, because if we beat Utah, the only team I'm scared of is USC, the team across town after that. If we beat Utah at Rice Eccles in Salt Lake City, this team can win 10 or 11 games easy
for sure
before the bowl game. And there's got to be some variance too with Garbers and Dante Moore, because as much as I love Dante and I'm excited about his future, you have to live with some of the freshman mistakes he's going to do, when he trots out there. I think that's a huge, question that a lot of people aren't talking about when it comes to what he brings to the table. There may be some games where, he's learning on the job. He may cost us a game or two in the process just because we're trying to give this kid experience going out there. I think with Garbers, in a way, just knowing he's a veteran, he's played in big-time college football games before. He was our starter when we went to Utah when Dorian got hurt 2 years ago. He was our starter, when we played he filled in for Dorian at the end of that Oregon game. He's been in some big situations. He came in for the Sun Bowl at the end of the game. So he's been in some big-time games. I think there's less room for error, weirdly enough, with a guy that's been there, done that,
sure,
has learned the offense for 4 years, as opposed to a guy that's going to be, going into college football his first time. So that's where the variance lies. But I would hammer the over. I believe this is the year. I think UCLA is going to have a real shot at the Pac-12 title. I believe that in my heart. This is not just some fan site, when people talk about us predicting UCLA to do well. We're deep at every position. And if that offensive line can get fortified, we don't really have any holes on this team. There might be teams that are more naturally talented, but not a lot of holes on this team.
Absolutely, Will. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think here's the key, is that UCLA's got a schedule break this year. And there's just a reality there. There's a softer schedule than what others have on this conference. When you take Oregon and Washington out of the equation, you don't have two top 15 teams. You don't have one of those top 15 non-conference games this year. Look, I mean, a couple of years ago, even though LSU was a down year, LSU was a big non-conference game. A Jake Haener at Fresno State. You go back a few years before that, Texas A&M coming to town, going on the road to Texas A&M. You don't have that big marquee non-conference game. No disrespect. Coastal, NC Central, San Diego State, they're all going to be tough games, but UCLA is going to be significantly favored there. So when you take out 3 big game opportunities, now you have that room to grow, Will, to your point. And so it really is only 3 games out of the 12 where you're an underdog. And so if you can even grab one of those 3 games and just have the discipline to not have the letdown this year, that's the key to me. It's not even so much how this team plays in those 3 games. It's how they approach the professionalism and discipline in the other games. How do we avoid the Arizona of last year? How do you avoid the Fresno State of the year before? How do you avoid that ultimate letdown game? Because if you just sort of take care of business and win the games you're supposed to, and you steal one, 10-2, 7-2, Will, to your point. If you either get Utah or you get Oregon State, SC looks very strong this year, to your earlier point. Depending on where the tie breaks fall in a year where there's 5 top 15 teams in the Pac-12, overall, in terms of jockeying for position, everyone's going to be kind of beaten up on everyone. It'll come down to tie breaks, and you have a clear path to the Pac-12 championship game. So I completely agree with you there. UCLA's, biggest enemy is going to be themselves this year and just overcoming the discipline to take care of business. But if they do that and they win the games that they're supposed to, this is a 10-win regular season, given the way the schedule breaks down. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see, because I think you're absolutely right. Utah's early, right? One of the 3 games is early. If it was sort of game 7, game 10, game 12, if all 3 of those games kind of fell in the second half, I think the probability of Dante Moore starting at day 1 is even higher, because he's going to have 6 games to kind of work into it. The fact that the Utah game is early in the first third of the season, that, to your earlier point, Will, really opens the door potentially for Garbers to really have this battle.
Played on the road at that stadium.
at that stadium.
At that stadium, which
for
is
the last time. For the last time. And go ask SC fans how loud that place can be, in terms of when they got it going. I mean, so it's really sort of a fascinating question. And I think that's also going to be part of the calculus with Chip about who the starting quarterback is going to be. So lots to kind of think about there, Will. But I agree with you. If they can just take care of business, this is 10 wins in the regular season with an opportunity for an 11th in the Pac-12 championship, with potentially an opportunity for a 12th in a bowl game. I mean, it really could be a 12-2 Rose Bowl championship historic type of season if they play their cards right.
And if you're charting the success of the program and how it's had an uptick, we're keeping that uptick going this year. I actually think this is the year that we're going to at least tie, maybe surpass the all-time wins record at UCLA, which is 10 games. Madman, this was a blast, man. Thank you for joining me, as always, for, just a fun preview for the season, man. I cannot wait for college football to start. I mean, we're going to be texting up a storm watching these UCLA
yes, sir.
games. We'll be tailgating out some of these UCLA games. So, guys, come on out. We'll have a lot more, details when it comes to the tailgate scene. But any closing thoughts on the second annual over-under UCLA Bruin Bible podcast?
Will, first of all, it's really special that football again is upon us. This is going to be a great year. We got all the coverage here between you and me, and the podcast, the writing, the whole deal. It's going to be end-to-end UCLA coverage this year. Last year, the Pac-12, so much to be excited about. And Bruin fans, get to the stadium. Let's get out there. Let's make a lot of noise early in the season. As alums, as boosters, as just overall fans. School isn't in session until end of September, so let's take the gauntlet and carry the torch here a little bit for the students before they arrive. Let's get out there. Let's pack the Rose Bowl. Let's show this team some love and support, and let's give them that momentum that they believe they can go all the way, because it's through our support that really matters. Will, you and I have talked to so many of the players in the offseason here. being in that Rose Bowl, that energy, feeling the Bruin community, it matters. They love it. It's one of the reasons they pick UCLA. And so you each make a huge difference to the success of this team by supporting this team through the LA Football Network, supporting this team through attending tailgates, the whole deal. Let's all be a committed fan base and see this team through, because this can be a very, very special season.
Can be a very, very special season indeed. It's great day to be alive and be a Bruin, man. We'll sign off with that. Bruin Bible, we are officially out. Let's freaking go. College football is back. Bruin Bible listeners, we've got a special sponsor for today's episode. It is AG1. AG1 has been something that I've really enjoyed using in my spare time. 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, and whole-source food nutrients in one scoop that you can use into your water. You stir it up. I use it before my workouts, before I start my day, and it has totally given me the energy I need to do the little things in life, like going to work, getting extra, an extra boost, a second wind, if you will, for a workout. Before I play pickleball with my friends, just it puts you in a good spirit of mind, and you're doing the healthiest possible thing by putting AG1 in your body. Make sure to check us out and get a special deal with the Bruin Bible. It's www.drinkag1.com/Bruin Bible to get the special deal that we provide. Once again, www.drinkag1.com/Bruin Bible to get that special deal. Now, back to the Bruin Bible.